Hi, good evening. My name is Aileen Teague, and I'm an assistant professor at the Bush School and coordinator of the speaker series, The Other Side of the Border, The Ties That Bind and Issues That Divide. Welcome both to those of you joining us here in person and those watching at home on Zoom. I would also like to extend a special welcome to Bush School Advisory Board member Royce Hickman, County Commissioner Steve Aldrich, Brian Mayer, Pro Temp, James Edge, and former U.S. Trade Representative Carla Hills. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and also thank you to you all who are basketball fans tonight for making some time to come and join us here. Contrary to what you think, I'm not supporting Purdue tonight, but I did want to make sure that I was festive enough for the evening. The objective of this speaker series, The Other Side of the Border, is to highlight practitioner perspectives on the U.S.-Mexico border, Mexico and Latin America, and that is the people involved in executing policy and engaging with its human impacts. We architected the series to run in lockstep with our growing Latin America concentration here at the Bush School. I've been so excited about the level of interest our community has had over Latin America, as well as trying to grapple with how best our state and our federal government can generate effective, long-term, and human-centered solutions, especially to one of the biggest issues of our time, and that is securing the southern border. Before I introduce our guest for today, Chief Roggow, I want to express my gratitude to the Mosbacher Institute, where my border series is housed. Thanks especially to Ms. Jill Stecco and Ms. Jennifer Moore for doing all the legwork for tonight's event, as well as to our director, Professor Raymond Robertson. So today we welcome Border Patrol Chief Matthew Roggow, acting commander of the El Paso sector. As Chief Border Patrol agent, he leads all Border Patrol enforcement operations along 264 border miles with Mexico, covering West Texas and southern New Mexico. He has management oversight of 11 stations, 6 permanent immigration checkpoints, and 3 forward operating bases encompassing approximately 125,500 square miles. With migrants making their way to the border in record numbers, the Border Patrol and its mission inspire significant public curiosity and, at times, criticism. And this is exactly why I'm thrilled that you're here with us tonight, Chief. Chief Roggow assumed his duties as the permanent Deputy Chief Patrol Agent of the El Paso sector in August 2019. Before this assignment, the chief served as an Associate Chief at U.S. Border Patrol Headquarters. After his promotion to patrol agent in charge of the sector intelligence unit in El Centro sector in 2006, he worked collaboratively with internal and external partners to deploy technology, allowing for the covert observation of smuggling activities, increasing the prosecutions of targeted smuggling organizations. A year later, as the assistant chief in Washington, D.C., he contributed to the first national-level standard operating procedures for intelligence units and oversaw the Northern Border Intelligence Pilot as a member of the SBI Net, which is the Secure Border Initiative Network team. Chief Roggow graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Integrated Studies from Champlain College with summa cum laude honors, and with a Master's of Science in Operations Management from the University of Arkansas, and completed the Customs and Border Protection's Leadership Institute. So here's how the event is going to work. Chief Roggow will speak for about 20 to 25 minutes before we open the floor for questions from you all. You are invited to submit questions by using your personal device to scan the QR code on the programs we've distributed. I'll be tracking your questions on my device, and if you have trouble submitting your question, there are student ambassadors in the back that you can ask for help. So please join me in welcoming Chief Matthew Roggow to the Bush School.
Good evening. I want to thank all of the wonderful staff here at Texas A&M This isn't the first event today. Some of the events started last evening with some of the Corps cadets, talking to them, as well as a host of events today here on the campus, as well as visiting the Bush Library. Absolutely wonderful opportunity, and as I was sharing with Dr. Teague, I'm very impressed with all of the work they're doing with their graduate students and their undergraduate students, and what an honor it was to have that opportunity today, so thank you. To each of you who decided to come out and hear a little bit from me today about what I will call the state of the border, thank you so much. It's a great opportunity for us to come out and share a little bit about what is actually happening on the United States border and some of the great things that the men and women of the United States Border Patrol are doing to carry out our mission. So there's, a few things that I'll cover before we get started, and one of those is I've also served on the northern border. So aside from my southern border service and my service at the headquarters office twice, I also had the opportunity to see how we execute our mission on the northern border. And so I don't necessarily think you're talking to the most qualified Border Patrol agent. That's probably Chief Owens, who serves as our national chief. But it's an honor to serve as one of the 9 Southwest border chiefs and lead the mission for the men and women of our sector. So on the cusp of last week, we witnessed our commissioner share a new strategy with our employees. That strategy covers the 2024 to 2028 time period, and we're anticipating that being posted to CBP, or Customs and Border Protection.gov, here really soon, as well as some of the activities that, in theory, we believe will help us bring greater control to our borders. And our focus is sort of shaped around Chief Owens' vision for how we handle today's current border environment. Has anybody heard anything about irregular migration in the news? I didn't see any hands, so I'll take that as a no. Certainly there is no doubt we are experiencing significant levels of irregular migration. I am fairly lucky in that the sector I am leading is not nearly as impacted as some of the other sectors. Certainly, if you've seen the activities down in Del Rio, while they have subsided a bit, Del Rio has been one of the more trafficked areas. Rio Grande Valley has taken its turn. Certainly, they've experienced what I would consider maybe flare-ups because their tempo isn't necessarily consistent. And if you were tuned into the news, you might have seen some of the activity in what they consider their East Cog, or the Brownsville area. And then Tucson continues to experience a significant level, as well as San Diego. And so as it relates to irregular migration, you've likely seen pictures, videos, photos of large amounts of individuals who have made crossing between the ports of entry. When they make a crossing between the ports of entry, that means it becomes a Border Patrol interdiction versus an interdiction at the port of entry, which is handled by our Customs and Border Protection officers. Our organization is really focused right now on ensuring we have the right facilities in place to make sure that we can handle the amount or the capacity of individuals that are coming across. And if you've ever met one of the Border Patrol agents who worked in those facilities, and you ask them to sort of compare their experience 10 years ago to their experience today, those facilities that support our handling of irregular migration, or large numbers of individuals making entry into the United States, oftentimes as large groups, are staffed quite well. We have medical staff, we have security staff, we have individuals responsible for caring for young migrants. And I can tell you that, when I served in the field, none of that existed. So while, the Border Patrol has, experienced these large levels of migration, in turn, they've shaped their strategy and shaped their approach to ensure that everybody who comes into our custody is treated humanely, with dignity and respect, and that those services are provided to them. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about conventional enforcement and our targeted enforcement efforts. And the reason, a lot of Border Patrol agents join the organization is not necessarily to handle or deal with irregular migration, but to rather, execute the duties that they're trained to do at the Border Patrol Academy. I suspect many of you have driven through a checkpoint sometime. I'm seeing some head nods. And how many of you have actually been down to the border and maybe seen a Border Patrol agent in and around the immediate border area? Does anybody know any ranch owners? So, ranch owners are a key stakeholder of ours because oftentimes individuals, whether they're trying to walk around our checkpoints or to make a legal entry at the border, they will traverse many of our ranch lands or cattle lands or farmlands. Our conventional enforcement efforts essentially are there to support our ability to detect individuals who are crossing the border, to identify those individuals, and then to bring that entry to an appropriate law enforcement resolution. And I think it's important, and I'm going to just walk back a little bit. In the irregular migration situation, that's the type of activity that you see on the news where individuals are giving themselves up to Border Patrol agents, typically in an urban environment. From a conventional enforcement perspective, or our conventional enforcement operations, these are individuals who are actually trying to defeat our capabilities and get away from our Border Patrol agents. Who has heard the term gotaways? Fair enough. That wasn't a term that was very widely known amongst individuals many years ago. In fact, we would spend a lot of time not necessarily talking about that. But it is a reportable to Congress and to OMB. And so the data is out there. It's just now becoming more known. And our conventional enforcement efforts are really there to help us keep from individuals getting away from Border Patrol agents and Border Patrol agents being successful in their efforts to apprehend them. The third approach to our strategy is targeted enforcement operations. Targeted enforcement operations almost sound exactly like, the title for it. I had the pleasure of joining the organization under the Clinton administration, and when I joined, it was well before the United States Border Patrol made their transition from the Department of Justice over to the Department of Homeland Security. And when I joined, the organization had individuals who participated in anti-smuggling units. We love acronyms in the Border Patrol, so we called it ASU. And if I make an acronym today and I don't tell you actually what it means, just raise your hand and yell at me, because we're horrible in the government about acronyms. But the anti-smuggling unit, or the ASU, is our effort to bring the organizations who are escaping our conventional forces or our conventional enforcement operations and bring them back to face justice for all of the smuggling deeds that they have participated in. And really those smuggling operations start in foreign countries. If it were not for the individuals in Immigration and Customs Enforcement and our Customs and Border Protection officials who serve in foreign posts, developing relations with these governments, we would not be able to do the things that we do from a targeting perspective, because in order to start at the source of where individuals are smuggled or where that paying scheme starts for those activities, you have to have individuals in those countries who have built rapport with foreign officials who can act on the information that we provide them. And so while we have been doing a lot of these things, we haven't necessarily coined it in the current approach that we are coining it in, and what you will see our new strategy come out looking like with targeted enforcement operations and anti-smuggling units. These folks, you know, I don't want to underestimate the impact that they have working with so many of our partners. And, you know, in the region I'm in, I've been to plenty of regions where it's tough to work with partners. Sometimes the sharing of information is not necessarily there. I'm proud to say that the region I'm in now, the partnerships are high. And I don't know if they're high because of the need or if it's because of the personal desire of the individuals who work in these units. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't give kudos to some of our fellow agencies that are out there who help us with that mission. So since I took command of the sector, I can tell you when I first got there, we didn't have a bit of technology. And now we're pretty proud to have incorporated a significant amount of ASTs, or automated surveillance towers, into our AOR. And, you know, if you ever get a chance to go out there to that region and you see these towers with solar panels sitting out there, it's a pretty impressive thing to experience over my time. As I was sharing with Dr. Teague, when I started in the agency, they pretty much gave you a flashlight, a roll of duct tape, some baling twine, and said, hey, go out and do your best. If you lose the footprints, you know, let us know where you lost them. Today, that's not the case. Today, our agents are equipped with telephones. They can receive digital information direct to their phones from these devices. And so, you know, Dr. Teague didn't necessarily mention it, but as I sort of sunset my career and leave the Border Patrol here soon, it's amazing to see where we have come in the 25 years I've had this opportunity. If you had asked me, would I have envisioned the current situation we're in, I'm not sure I would have. You know, what it will look like in 25 years, I'm not quite sure. One of our students asked us what they thought the next 25 years might look like, and I asked them if they had a crystal ball, because I certainly don't know that. So just to qualify some of the things before I take my seat and join Dr. Teague, encounters or apprehensions are high. You know, when I checked the morning reports this morning, as of today, the U.S. Border Patrol has apprehended nearly 1.07 million individuals crossing our border. I will tell you that, you know, in the sector I'm in, fortunately, we've had about a 65% decrease from last year, but we're in one of the more challenging sectors, and urban environments seem to be more likely to experience these large crossings. And then because you know, we can't turn on the TV without hearing about fentanyl, our agents are all engaged in a national level effort, which I think is pretty critical. And I'm proud to report that, you know, fiscal year to date, our agents have done a great job interdicting more than 2,500 pounds of fentanyl. And so certainly impressive work being done within CBP and the United States Border Patrol. If you ask me if we're doing enough, well, no, there's still deaths in the United States, so we've still got a long way to go. But the fact that we are working towards a strategy that is starting to pay some significant dividends, I think should be reassuring to each of you. So, shall we?
Okay, so hopefully everyone can hear us. This is the fun part where we get to kind of have the Barbara Walters one-on-one exclusive. So I mean, you've been fielded a lot of questions, and I think you've given us a really great idea of your background and some of the challenges and how you've seen the Border Patrol evolve. And I wanted to open up our discussion today with kind of a talk about the federal versus the state interaction around border security. As you know, Senate Bill 4, or SB 4, has passed both houses of the Texas legislature and awaits Governor Greg Abbott's signature. SB 4, as many of us know, imposes harsh penalties on law enforcement and other government agencies that don't honor detainer requests or prevent local law enforcement agencies from having policies that direct law enforcement resources to the most serious threats of public safety. It is due to take place on to take effect on September 1st. I mean, before SB 4, though, we have Operation Lone Star. I mean, you have a lot of enforcement entities, and you spoke of partnerships. But do you think you could give us a little bit of idea of, from the perspective of the Border Patrol, I mean, these multiple enforcement entities, is that ultimately helpful to your mission? I mean, does it undermine your mission? What does that look like?
Certainly. Y'all can hear me, right? Okay, perfect. So, you know, we have not spent a lot of time looking into SB 4 simply because we understood that there would be a certain amount of court challenges, and what SB 4 sort of looks like when it comes to fruition, it would have probably not been prudent to have trained all of our employees. But what I'd like to talk a little bit about is our work with Texas DPS. We have been the recipients of both support from Texas DPS as well as Operation Lone Star. And Operation Lone Star refers to the individuals working under the state guard authorities and supporting DPS. Does anybody know where Terrell County is? Has anybody seen the sheriff of Terrell County? Okay, so the sheriff of Terrell County is a former Border Patrol agent who ran the station out there and then retired. He's out there working amongst all of our resources, whether that's DPS, the U.S. Border Patrol, the Texas Game Wardens, Homeland Security investigations, and to give you an idea, the contingency is not probably what you would expect it to be. The contingency of individuals, numbers in the teens, who are out there supporting us with a detection capability. It's really critical that Border Patrol agents have the opportunity to detect individuals who are crossing through the ranch lands, who are seeking to evade our authorities. These aren't individuals who are turning themselves in like you maybe see down in Del Rio. These are individuals, typically single adult males. In fact, our apprehensions hover between 80 and 90% single adult males, so we don't see a lot of family units. We don't see a lot of unaccompanied children. These folks are actually trying to walk, as much as 30 miles to get past our resources. And so the support we're seeing is through that detection capability. They alert our agents to the activity, and then our agents actually take the enforcement action versus any of the individuals working under the state of Texas.
Okay. One interesting thing we talked about earlier, Chief, was just in terms of the funding situation from Congress, from the U.S. government. And I mean, I think that all of us read about sort of the annual government shutdowns, which is seeming to happen more and more often. And I'm just wondering, from the perspective of the Border Patrol, you spoke around, in your opening comments, you spoke about the fact that Border Patrol agents are generally better equipped, but you've also mentioned that there's some uncertainty in terms of your strategy, given the fact that decision-making in Washington, especially with Congress, kind of puts just that, a bit of uncertainty. And I'm wondering what sorts of changes would you like to see made at the top that might help clarify the Border Patrol's mission, particularly when it comes to leadership in Washington?
So, very, very interesting question, and quite a few questions in there. That's okay. It's no secret, every year the United States Border Patrol, much like every other government agency, receives their appropriations from Congress. And I think it's critical to talk about what the Border Patrol is actually responsible for. So does the Border Patrol house detainees who are awaiting court or awaiting their time in front of a judge? No, we do not. The agency responsible for making those decisions is within Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and that's the Office of Enforcement and Removal Operations. The Border Patrol is simply responsible for the initial arrest, for a violation of crossing at other than a location designated as a POE or in between the POEs. And then we notify Immigration and Customs Enforcement of the detainee, provide them with some of the necessary information for them to make a custodial decision. And then ultimately that office makes a custodial decision. We have seen years where Congress has funded enforcement and removal operations with a significant amount of funding. We've also seen them fund them with very low amounts of funding. And so if you sort of think of this pipeline that exists, if an individual is going to come into U.S. government custody for crossing the border at a location other than a designated port of entry, and be arrested by a Border Patrol agent and referred on to ICE officials, ICE will take their case in front of the immigration judge, which is a part of Department of Justice, and must have the ability to detain them for that period of time. Otherwise, there's no sense in detaining an individual for 10 days if you're not going to actually effect a removal on it. And so some of the things we've experienced in the past is when agencies are not sort of funded equally, what we've experienced is different custodial decisions and different outcomes in the civil enforcement of immigration. There is a criminal aspect, but I will tell you that the criminal aspect is generally held for individuals who are engaged in the actual smuggling activities or who are aggravated felons or subject to prosecution for re-entry after removal. And that's a completely different piece handled by the United States Marshals Service and eventually the Bureau of Prisons. And so I would say, if you asked me, and I think Chief Owens did a good job sort of carrying this water in the national media recently, if we are going to have consequences, then we need to have the funding for the whole spectrum of the immigration continuum. Otherwise, each of the agencies are not going to be able to effect their duty and their responsibility and repatriate individuals who are found to be removable, who were originally encountered by the Border Patrol.
I couldn't not ask you, I mean, one of the most common tropes that you see about border security and the southern border is this notion of open borders. And particularly that under the Biden administration, a lot of Republican leadership has criticized the president's border policy, saying that, to some, I mean, you name it, that migrants are being let in, that there's open borders, and Republican leadership has flown down to the border in these sort of very ostentatious measures. I mean, to what extent is that true? I mean, I know that in the media, as you said earlier, there's a little inch of truth in everything that you read, but I mean, what would you tell someone that is asking about the situation at the border in terms of people coming in that are far removed from the border, that perhaps live in like an Ohio or a Kentucky, and they don't actually see what's going on at the border?
Did we check to see if we have any of those people on the Zoom?
Perhaps.
All right, so, I would say that, open borders is nothing more than a description of an individual's perception of the situation. The truth is everybody who crosses that border, who we detect, will be arrested by United States Border Patrol agents. Now, whether they will be placed into civil proceedings or criminal proceedings, that's really dependent upon their background and the unlawful activity that they're engaged in. But I think the interpretation of open borders is typically referring to the idea that not everybody who crosses that border is detained in U.S. custody. And when they're not detained in U.S. custody, and they're referred on into the civil proceedings in the immigration courts, should they not show for their case or their hearings, then I think individuals consider that tantamount to an open border because they're not actually adhering to the requirements that have been stipulated to them upon arrest and an issue of notice to appear by United States Border Patrol agents.
Okay. Another question I have, and I want to remind you that shortly I'm going to begin taking questions from the audience. So if you have a question that you'd like to pose to Chief Roggow, please scan the barcode and we will do the best that we can to get to your questions here in just a few minutes. What do you think, I mean, you've been in the Border Patrol for nearly 25 years. What do you think what are the public's, the U.S. public, in your opinions, general perception of the Border Patrol? I mean, are there any misconceptions about the agency, about your agency?
I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier, right? There's a lot of stuff written about the border, and there's a lot of stuff in digital media about the border. I think one of the best things that folks can do is look for the Border Patrol officials who are out there on Facebook or Instagram, and recognize that the agency seeks to share information. It's pretty timely. I actually have our assistant chief who oversees our communications team here with me tonight, who gets me this information pretty consistently, and then I give him a thumbs up or a thumbs down based on whether or not it's going to fit within our policy or what can be put out there. And I think we're doing a much better job trying to inform people from within. You talked a little bit about it, that sometimes, and I think you referenced maybe an inch or a foot of truth, in some articles. Certainly, reporters work very fast to get information out there, and I think sometimes with that speed, maybe not necessarily everything that gets out there is a full reflection of the situation. We have done a much better job, and I will tell you, when I started my tour in headquarters the second time in 2017, we did not have public-facing statistics. We have since fixed that problem, and in about 2020, the agency launched a public-facing statistics site at cbp.gov. You can go in there and see the newsroom as well as the statistics, and that gives you a strong understanding of what's actually occurring at the border these days. And so I think at the end of the day, we'll keep on getting better at doing that, sharing our story. And certainly, if you tune in to the individuals who are doing this work day in and day out, you're going to get the most accurate picture that we can portray for you.
Okay. I'm going to open up to some of the audience questions, and they're really excellent questions coming in. And this one's a little bit of a long two-parter, which I'm sure you'll love. A favorite topic of discussion in the post 9/11 era has been the militarization of the police force and, to a degree, the militarization of the border. Has the militarization of police and the border been effective? And maybe the implied question here is, to what degree, how much do you believe in that sense of militarization? The Border Patrol has its own very prestigious tactical team, BORTAC. Do you find that tactical teams like BORTAC are needed for border enforcement?
So I'll start off with militarization of the border. I think that's a characterization that is not necessarily true. Our agents sort of look and do the same things they did when I joined in 1999, except they might be a little bit more informed now than they had been in the past. Certainly, if you compare militarization to lengths of border barrier, wall, fencing, there has been some increases there, but not really enough to make that great of a difference. There's still stretches of urban territory where individuals can cross pretty quickly, and the intent of that border barrier was always to slow individuals and give the Border Patrol resources the tactical advantage to interdict them before they could get into a house somewhere along the border and wait out our authorities or our abilities. If militarization is increasing the technology that we use to detect individuals, which I'm not really certain it is, I would call that a smart border, then, yes, we have increased our technology holdings within the Border Patrol. And then the reference to the Border Patrol Tactical Unit. It's a very small group. I think maybe sometimes because of the things they get involved in, people can think there's so many more of them. I can tell you Chief Sullivan runs the BORTAC and BORSTAR units. He is in dire need for more because these individuals are helping train foreign resources in other countries under the Department of State missions. They're deploying to large profile searches. You probably saw some of the work they've done in Pennsylvania and New York and other places where there were lengthy manhunts, and each organization brought a certain amount of folks to it. I would say the only thing that an individual might want to qualify as militarization of the border might be the advent of our MRT, or our mobile response team. These are essentially agents who have been trained in just a few more capabilities like land navigation, tracking operations, and these types of things. Certainly not militarization of the border. And we trained them because we saw a need to sort of fill this gap between not having enough special operators to respond to the demand signal that we receive as an organization. And so each of the sectors built MRT teams, and I will tell you that really what they do is glorified Border Patrol work. It's a bad way to say it, and I'm sure some MRT person is listening to me and thinking, well, we do more than that, but the reality is they're sort of a mobile force that we can move quickly into areas where we have challenges. So, a lot of them are EMT certified. They were there in Del Rio in 2021 providing EMT services to the large group of Haitians that had assembled in the Del Rio area. So not exactly militarization, more of a support capacity to the Border Patrol agents on the ground.
I want to shift to another question on the border wall, and specifically the topic of a border wall has been floated by both sides of the political aisle. The Big Bend sector, Big Bend National Park in particular, is a fragile economical environment with national parks on both sides of the border, a wall would be an ecological disaster. Do you think it would be effective in the Big Bend region, or across your sector in general, specifically to deter or hinder the movement of migrants, drugs, and guns? And that is the construction of a wall.
There's many people who have sort of coined this phrase, walls work. And in their effort to introduce individuals to how we utilize wall, fencing, or border barrier. I will tell you that walls do not catch people. Technology does not catch people. Additionally, with our border barrier comes access. I would say, and I'm not much of a betting man, but from sort of a risk perspective, that is one of the last places in the nation I would expect to see any type of wall. We have amazing geographical features that prevent people from arriving to the Mexico border and making illegal crossing there. It's quite an inhospitable area if you've been down there. Those individuals who are going to make their entry are going to be walking for quite some time. It's not like they're going to actually just cross that barrier and find themselves in an urban environment. We work very closely with the National Park Service. We have a lot of great memorandums of agreement in place to support them as well as them support us. And I would say of all the area of the Big Bend sector, that's one of the areas where our interdiction effectiveness is the highest, and it's because of our ability to work together and sort of the lack of criminal networks that are operating in that area. So,
okay. We're going to shift this next question looking at the U.S.-Canada border in comparison with the U.S.-Mexico border. In a world where the southern border is fully secure, do you believe the other border, like the Canada border, could become an equally important issue?
I think it's important to talk a little bit about how Border Patrol agents interact with individuals who are smuggled into the country, as well as the individuals responsible for that smuggling. We spend a lot of time interviewing individuals who have made illegal entry into the United States. And that is how we sort of understand their travel patterns or their travel paths and where they made decisions about how they would fulfill their entry into the United States or see their entry into the United States through. Canada is worked quite well with us. There was a period where they were experiencing higher migration from individuals from Mexico. So you would think to yourself, why are individuals from Mexico flying to Canada to make illegal entry on the northern border? Well, if you make entry on the southwest border and you don't have a legitimate claim to remain in the United States, I repatriate you that day back to Mexico because of our standing repatriation agreements. But if you make entry into Canada and you are subject to repatriation, we don't have Border Patrol agents making that drive down to the U.S.-Mexico border each day. We're limited in our flight capacity, so we would historically detain those individuals flying back to the southwest border and then repatriate them. But one of the things that we've seen, and I think it's important to the discussion, is when countries make changes about who they will allow into their country through air travel, specifically Canada, that can have an impact on the northern border. And so I could certainly see a situation where if more individuals were able to fly into Canada and the southwest border became more secure, certainly people could exploit that capability to further their entry or further their travel plans and make entry into the United States.
I've had a couple questions coming up that I'm trying to clump into one. A lot of folks assume illegal migration is predominantly from Mexico, Central American countries, and South America. And a couple of people in the audience have asked for you to speak to the percentages or the growing percentages of migrants you see from different areas, both from Latin America and from outside the region, which you gave some pretty impressive facts about that earlier today.
Last week I was with some of my counterparts at a conference, and one of my counterparts brought up that at this point the United States Border Patrol has interdicted individuals from over 150 countries this year. I did some quick research because I thought maybe this might come up. The UN recognizes 193 member nations and 2 non-member nations. There's also a few other countries on there. So if we just sort of put that number at 200 nations throughout planet Earth, we have interdicted individuals from over 150 of those this year. So it is unique, right? When I joined the United States Border Patrol in the late 90s, we would encounter a lot of individuals from Mexico, a lot of individuals from Central America, and a few individuals from South America. Those numbers have changed pretty significantly, whether that's individuals from Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, but also individuals from Baltic countries, Africa, and Asian countries. I was sort of looking at the numbers from today's morning report. You know, if I had to, this isn't a proper statistic, if I had to guess, there were about 50 different countries listed on the apprehension report or the interdiction report just from yesterday. So the border has changed pretty significantly in that aspect. A lot of individuals are flying into South America or Central American countries, and then making that trek up to the southern border and eventually making their illegal entry.
What's your relationship like with Mexican enforcement agents, and are they generally supportive of the United States' efforts based on what you see? Do you generally have cooperative working relationships with Mexican agents?
So I'm probably most qualified to talk about the efforts at the local level. And interestingly enough, one of my colleagues here who joined me, he works on our foreign operations branch team. So we're communicating daily with our government of Mexico officials and talking to them about repatriations, contact with different consular officers, talking to them as we repatriate individuals back into Mexico, as well as doing things like talking about our collaborative efforts to secure or to make the border safer. Specifically in our sector, we've put out a significant amount of rescue beacons. We work collaboratively with the government of Mexico to determine where those are best situated based on the migration trends within our sector, recognizing that a lot of these people aren't necessarily expecting a 30 or 40 mile journey through our area as they try to further their entry and evade our resources. They don't often come with enough water or food or those types of things, and unfortunately at times we've seen individuals perish in our region. The numbers are not high. They're not high as compared to last year, but it does happen, and so we work collaboratively to say, how can we make this a safer place? Whether that's public service announcements, whether that's putting out placards to indicate where they might be so that they can telephone us and tell us what that placard is, or pressing the buttons on our rescue beacons that have cell phone chargers on them and tell them, stay here. U.S. Border Patrol agents will come and rescue you. And then last but not least, some of the things that we do are mirrored patrols. A lot of people don't know these things, and so they do help us to run a patrol parallel to us on the south side of the border and report to us the information that they collect as we do to them about where crossings might be increasing or where we find additional sign. That would be like footprints or debris or those types of things left behind by individuals who are making crossing there. So.
This is something that we talked about earlier, but one question came up here. How important are presidential administration changes to your job and your ability to execute it? And I mean, just to add a little bit more context to that question, when President Biden came into office, I mean, there was this sort of hope that there would be changes on the southern border and changes to immigration policy, and then very shortly after, VP Harris famously said, you know, don't come. And I mean, clearly, if there were to be another Trump presidency next year, there could be drastic changes at the border. And I mean, how does that affect your ability to do your job?
So I think you know, I've certainly I was at headquarters when George W. Bush transferred the presidency to President Obama, and while I was not at the White House, or I'm sorry, at the headquarters office for the transition from Trump to Biden or Obama to Trump, I can tell you that the organization works hard to establish what are called transition teams. And essentially those transition teams are built with individuals who have very good knowledge of the organization's practices, the organization's strategy, and they spend a lot of time briefing whether it, you know, if there is an actual transition, they will spend the time briefing the incoming advisors and other officials that will come in with whoever that president might be. And so a lot of those things will start here pretty soon. They'll start looking at making sure they have all the right documents as it relates to the strategy and the different sectors and the statistics and all of those things that are vital for an administration to understand as they sort of shape their policy.
I'm going to combine two questions together that are kind of, they don't really go together, but I just think that they could be an interesting combination. I mean, the first question that comes up is, are you required to use the word irregular migration? Why can't you call it illegal immigration or migration? I mean, is that a specific choice in semantics that you use?
So I think at this point, everybody would agree the amount of migration that we've experienced is irregular. I will use the term illegal migration as well, but I will say that, you know, the individuals that we, you know, prosecute are prosecuted for illegal entry, right? Mm-hmm. And the civil you know, sort of interpretation of their entry is that of an illegal entry. But essentially, you know, with so many people migrating and not experiencing these numbers before, it is irregular. I would, you know, at what point it becomes regular, I'm not necessarily certain. It'll probably be past my service in the organization. But we do try to look at our mission set based on what we're dealing with. And the reality is an irregular migrant is somebody who presents themselves to us, who doesn't seek to evade capture. And that's why we sort of spent the time to look at conventional enforcement efforts and targeting enforcement efforts, which are really working to interdict the individuals who don't want to be interdicted, and then the irregular migration aspect, which is individuals just surrendering to U.S. Border Patrol authorities shortly after their entry.
Fantastic. There's also some water here.
Thank you.
If you'd like some. So, do you think that most of what we're seeing right now, and what you're dealing with, is irregular and not illegal migration? Because it seems like I just read a headline in a prominent newspaper, and they said that asylum claims are sort of the primary means for migration to the United States these days, and that might be a little bit of an exaggeration. But I mean, is it mostly irregular and not illegal?
So I will tell you that each sector is different, and some sectors experience both. If you look at the situation in El Paso, Texas right now, the individuals who are crossing, in the fenced area, that would be irregular migration. The individuals who are crossing in the area of Santa Teresa, New Mexico, who are trying to evade Border Patrol resources, those individuals are trying to defeat our conventional enforcement efforts and our targeting efforts. And so sectors experience both. In our sector, we have had individuals just turn themselves in at Presidio. Presidio, Texas is directly across from the border from Ojinaga, but the individuals who are not crossing through Presidio, not crossing through that urban environment, are trying to evade U.S. Border Patrol resources. And so it's a good way for us internally to sort of look at the two different efforts that we have to undertake to be successful in our mission.
What happens, when somebody turns themselves into Border Patrol agents, what happens to them? You're on a time clock in some ways, right? In terms of how you process them. What can in theory happen when a migrant encounters you and does not try to evade capture? What are their options?
So our agents who encounter individuals who surrender to them will collect some basic biometric or biographical information and place it into their phone. Why do they do this? Individuals who are receiving them at what we refer to as centralized processing locations. Centralized processing locations is a collection of resources in a geographical area that are there to administer the processing of detainees. Recently, our organization made a move to hire a significant amount of people who we refer to as Border Patrol Processing Coordinators, or BPPCs for short. They don't have the same arrest authorities as an agent, but they're there to help us in our mission to process individuals and to care for them during their time of detention. When they arrive to one of our centralized processing centers, typically an agent has already been able to review that information on those individuals. They might have been able to start some of the checks. They'll utilize our enforcement system to collect both the fingerprints and a capture of the individual. And from there, that information will be run through so many of the law enforcement systems, not just ours, but shared law enforcement systems, to learn if this individual is responsible for previous criminal activity. That aids them in their decision and aids Immigration Customs Enforcement in their decision of who should be detained with those very small resources that they have because of the threat that they might present to the community should they be released. And for the individuals who do not come back with derogatory information and are placed into proceedings, and those proceedings won't occur in a reasonable amount of time, they're often released into the United States. And so that's sort of the continuum for an individual who surrenders at entry.
What are the procedures to prevent criminals from gaining entry? Because you have a phone and you have resources that are available but limited. And what happens if you suspect somebody could be a threat to U.S. security or a criminal or a gang member, for example?
So I'm going to use a term here to describe something that I'm not going to talk to the specifics in, but essentially our agents have a super query. And I say super query because we are connected to so many different databases. DHS maintains biometric information on individuals. DOJ maintains database information on individuals. If you've never heard of our National Targeting Center, our National Targeting Center sits up in the Washington, D.C. area, and they help CBP, or they're a very vital component of CBP, who looks at information of either individuals who have been detained by U.S. Border Patrol or individuals who are arriving to the many ports of entry that CBP maintains airports, on land borders, and sea borders. And it's run against this data set. So, I think I talked a little bit about it earlier today with some students. We have an outstanding collaboration with Central America in Guatemala, where we're receiving a lot of the information from authorities in Guatemala, El Salvador, as well as Honduras, as well as officials from Mexico. And so if individuals have, potentially committed a crime in those locations or belong to a gang, we do have folks who are looking at this data and making sure that these criminals are detected at the point at which we either collect biographical or biometric information. And typically they're moved into a different stream. I sort of mentioned the civil enforcement stream and the criminal enforcement stream. And so these individuals will be held in the criminal enforcement stream, referred on to the United States Marshals after an initial appearance for a criminal prosecution, and then detained through U.S. Marshals custody until their criminal case is adjudicated and they're released back to Immigration and Customs Enforcement for further detention or repatriation to a country.
This next question has been asked in a couple of different ways, but what do you see as the largest kind of future threats on the U.S. southern border? One person asked about technology and its constant evolutions. Drones are beginning to be a part of everyday life. According to 60 Minutes, people are using TikTok to know about crossing locations. What do you see as the biggest threat technology-wise, or in general, and how will it affect the smuggling of people, guns, or drugs? But in general, I just think that it's worth asking this question, and a few of you have, about sort of the future threats on the southern border as you see them.
Yeah, so I won't sit here and deny that the use of social media and some of these messaging platforms aren't a threat to our operations, because the reality is they are. But we're always taking steps to look at how we combat these types of things. And so while we might be a little bit behind in the advent or use of these things, as we build strategies or techniques to sort of counter these activities, we've become more capable in conducting our enforcement. There's no doubt that the counter drone or counter SUAS, we call them SUAS, that stands for small unmanned aerial or unmanned aircraft systems. We've certainly seen those devices utilized down in the immediate border space to reveal the locations of our agents and for the criminal networks to make decisions about where they might cross individuals or contraband. But again, another area where we're working collaboratively with the FAA, legislators, and others to build a counter SUAS or a counter drone capability that allows us to take control of those devices and prevent the cartels from having the upper hand. I think probably, one of the biggest challenges we have, and I think you're going to look at me and probably question me on this, and it's okay. We have a lot of folks being recruited from areas like Houston, areas like San Antonio, well away from the border, who are sort of falling for this guise of quick money and coming down into the border region. And, they're being told to do things like run from the Border Patrol.
Like American citizens?
Yes, drive fast when encountered by the Border Patrol. And, I think the challenge is these aren't seasoned NASCAR drivers. These aren't, individuals who have sort of been in this situation before. And a lot of them, don't necessarily know how they're going to react when they're, down in the immediate border region. They don't know the roads well enough. They don't travel them each day. And, they're being recruited by these criminal networks because they have some of the least amount of information about the criminal network and the promise of pay is high. You know, to give you an example, it's not out of the ordinary for us to encounter an individual who was driving 5 subjects who had made illegal entry into the United States and to receive, you know, $3,000 to take them to a major metropolitan area. And oftentimes they're young. I don't want to say they don't know any better, but they've sort of been convinced of this great opportunity. And, you know, that in and of itself can be a little bit challenging for our organization, especially if they recruit individuals under the age of 18 because of the challenges with dealing with juveniles.
Well, Chief, I mean, we're at under 10 minutes, and there's still over, there's still over 30 questions, and I'm doing my best to kind of make my way through the queue, and I think it's a testament to our collective curiosity about what the organization does and just how many dimensions there are, and so I'm making haste, but we still have some really interesting questions in the queue, so I'll proceed with the next one. And do you believe that allocating substantial billions of dollars, is that exactly what's written here, towards reinforcing border wall sections would be better utilized by investing in advancing and implementing technology, as well as improving facilities and expanding the number of Border Patrol officers?
So, you know, I think anytime that we sort of look at the Border Patrol from just one dynamic, or we look at the border from just one dynamic, we're not doing ourselves justice. I talked a little bit about border barrier, and if a border barrier is not actually maintained or observed, and an individual makes a crossing, you know, what exactly did we have the border barrier there for if we don't have the commensurate resources to make that interdiction or apprehension? The same can be said of technology, right? So really, you know, the future of the border needs to be a border where all of those capabilities are integrated. That's access through good border roads. That is barrier where necessary. That is technology where necessary, and agents where necessary. And when you combine those, you know, 4 things, you generally have a good recipe for success, because the agent can be alerted to the presence of an individual. They can reach that area through some mechanism of travel and encounter that individual and make the interdiction. So, you know, I think sometimes a lot of folks think if, you know, the border's the same everywhere. The reality is the border's not the same everywhere. In some places, there's great geographic inhibitors that really challenge individuals to make crossings there. And then there's other areas where it's quite easy to make crossings because it's an urban-to-urban environment, and there's nothing preventing them from making that entry.
Well, along those lines, you mentioned earlier, and one person in the audience asked this, that the apprehensions in your sector had decreased by 65%. I mean, can you speculate what might have been responsible for that decrease? Or is it just sort of a change of the tide?
Certainly, it's the great leadership of my sector team. No, you know, I think there's a lot of things that sort of go into the recipe we experienced within our sector. We were very lucky to have collected so much information on 2 of the organizations that were operating in our area. And Joint Task Force Alpha, which is led by the Department of Justice and looks at expanding the reach of human smuggling investigations, supported us in 2 of our cases because so many individuals had died in the desert. And we had collected enough information that they felt comfortable going forward and targeting these individuals with criminal consequences. And not just individuals in Mexico, not just individuals in the United States, but individuals in Guatemala. In fact, the Department of Justice turned around and held some press conferences announcing these efforts and how successful they were. it was one of the first times that we went down into Guatemala to find source providers who were the start of the smuggling chain and bring them back to the United States to face charges for their criminal activities. We were lucky to not just have one, but to have two parts of an organization brought in front of that team. And so that really disrupted the cartel efforts south of our area. In fact, there were times where they weren't sure if they had a mole or how the U.S. government could have been so successful to target their organization. And so we saw a lot of that traffic drop off. I would jokingly say to some of our folks, you couldn't drive through that area without encountering a group. Now you got to go out there and spend 3 days looking for a group, because the reality is they're not illegally crossing through that area anymore. And so I think that is a good demonstration of how, when you have appropriate consequences for cartels who are perpetuating this activity, and you apply those consequences to the cartel members, you can have a pretty successful effort on your hands. Thank you.
Well, along those lines, with sacrifice, and I'm really happy that you brought that up, because there's an excellent question here, and it touches on what we spoke about earlier with respect to the sacrifice made by many of those who serve on the Border Patrol. And I mean, there's been a number of agents that have been injured, who've lost their lives, or who've experienced challenges on the job. And I mean, are those numbers increasing or decreasing? Could you speak a little bit about, I mean, that sense of sacrifice, and particularly when Border Patrol agents get promoted to border supervisor, as you said, I mean, the amount of responsibility that they have, I mean, what sorts of challenges, I mean, is it that they're facing, and how is that affecting the force?
So I will say that, having been a supervisor or a leader for so many years in the organization, we encourage our team to think about, how are you deploying your agents each day? Are you giving them the best opportunity to be successful? We have some pretty remote areas, and we often don't encourage our agents to just trudge into remote areas without considering the potential challenges that they might face. And so we spend a lot of time looking at, where are we going to be most successful making these interdictions of the groups that make crossing in our AOR. We've also done a really good job sort of impressing upon them so many of the challenges they might face within their organization, and looking at it from a safety and health perspective. And I credit, if you've been a leader in the workforce and you've worked with a unionized workforce, sometimes those relations can't be great, or they can be challenging. But even our union leadership, which represents the agents, have really leaned forward into giving our agents the best opportunity to be successful in their work and to do it the safest way possible. I will say Border Patrol agents are assaulted at times, and I have yet to see a situation in which the Department of Justice, who represents the government in criminal cases, hasn't taken those cases on. They have taken on every one that I've seen, and that commitment from the Department of Justice to protect our agents and ensure that individuals who assault our agents are charged and face a consequence for their decision, absolutely critical.
Well, Chief, there are over 30 questions left, and we are at time. I want to thank you all for coming out and for submitting your questions, and to you, Chief Roggow, for spending your time and your day with us here in College Station. If you're not too quick to run off, feel free to come down here and shake the Chief's hand on your way out. And if you'll please join me in giving the Chief a round of applause for coming to visit with us today.